Hello again, everybody. I'm Chris Mooneyham, and welcome to the TCA All Sports Report. As always, brought to you by Fox 5 Atlanta, 680 The Fan, and of course, the Touchdown Club of Atlanta. Well, a busy show this week, and I mean a busy show this week. In the My Take portion of our program at the end of the show, I'm going to talk about why the NCAA needs to act and why they need to act now as far as the future of recruiting. We've got a great nugget of history from Brad Walsh, our TCA historian, about one of the great teams in a single season in Georgia high school football that was honored by the TCA. But coming up next, we find out what's happening. Well, with the commitment of Roquan Smith to the University of Georgia, which, by the way, I'll talk about a little bit later in the My Take portion of the program. You all know the story of Roquan Smith was going to go to UCLA. They had the coaching change. He ends up at the University of Georgia. Again, we'll talk about it a little bit later. Of course, most of you know the story, and it's been talked about by just about every media outlet across the country. But the reason I bring it up is because the last set of team rankings are out now for the 2015 recruiting rankings cycle, for lack of a better phrase. Now, I like to go with 24/7 composite rankings, where they take all of the different recruiting analysts' numbers and put them all together. And that's what I'll be focused on here as we talk about the top 10 and a couple of local schools. Alabama edges USC for the number one spot, but Southern Cal came charging hard with a couple of West Coast commits, especially there in the Los Angeles area, and nearly caught Alabama. But yet again, Alabama takes the number one spot. Trojans number 2, Seminoles number 3, Tennessee number 4. Boy, oh boy, Tennessee has put together quite a few really solid recruiting classes here over the last couple of years, mainly because they're coming into the state of Georgia. That's one big reason. LSU 5, Georgia 6. We'll talk about the Dogs in a moment. Ohio State 7, Clemson 8, Auburn 9, and then Texas rounds out your top 10. I'm going to tell you something, folks. I almost think that Georgia's recruiting class is actually a little bit underrated, believe it or not. And I'm not being a home-cooking homer here. Home-cooking homer? Did I just say that? Well, who cares? Because I've got to get into the fact I really believe it's a little underrated. Maybe just a smidge, but Trenton Thompson, a lot of people had as their number one player in the country. He goes to Georgia. Detrez Patrick, I think, is an NFL football player and a potential 3-year, maybe 4-year starter in the SEC. Terry Godwin is one of the great all-around athletes in the entire country, and some services, of course, had him number one as far as the ATH category in the entire country. DeAndre Walker, an underrated defensive end, and he was one of the more highly rated defensive ends in the entire country. Rico McGraw was going to be at Alabama until the last couple of weeks. Chauncey Rivers is incredibly underrated at the defensive end position. I'm telling you, folks, this was, without question, one of the top 3 or 4 recruiting classes that Mark Richt has ever had at the University of Georgia. We'll see, of course, in the next few years if it equates to that highly elusive national championship. Georgia Tech, according to 24/7 Sports, comes in at number 43. Now, I must tell you, I also disagree with that. A little more wholeheartedly, I personally, having now looked at the numbers, would have put Georgia Tech somewhere around 36, maybe 37. To some, that'll sound like I'm splitting hairs, but really it's not. A 6-spot differential, even that far down the list, is really a pretty big deal. I love Georgia Tech's class. Paul Johnson doing an amazing job over the last 3 years of getting guys inside the Empire State of the South and getting a certain type of kid. Not just athletic kids, but also kids with a real grit, like A.J. Gray, who I think will be an NFL football player. Mikael Lance Davis, a really tough running back who, of course, fell off some radars because he had some offseason troubles in 2014. Brad Stewart may be the most underrated wide receiver in the entire country, the kid out of Benedictine. DeAndre Walker didn't get a lot of attention. Dorian Walker, the running back and cornerback out of Mount Perrin Christian, which is the reason he didn't get a lot of attention because he played 1A private school here in the state of Georgia. Tyler Cooksey out of GAC, one of the more underrated linebackers in the entire Southeast. Look, Georgia Tech had a really, really good recruiting class this year. I think top 35, and I think for that reason, with these kids, last year's squad, and the year before, I'm telling you something, folks. I think the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, I think the Ramblin' Wreck, the favorites to win the ACC championship in 2015. Coming up next, our positive athletes from the state of Georgia. We'll start with Bailey Guffin. He's a senior boys soccer athlete from East Paulding High School. This year, it hasn't turned out like Bailey wanted it to, having to miss the soccer season as he's recovering from an ACL and LCL injury. But that hasn't stopped him from being involved with the team. In fact, Bailey's taken an active role in helping coach the team and has also been named team captain for the season, even though he's not able to play. Next is Angelique Simmons. She's a senior girls swimmer at Sprayberry High School. Angelique's been dealt a tough hand, having lost both of her parents growing up. But this unfortunate circumstance has not kept her from being one of the most positive athletes on her team, often stepping into a leadership role to help encourage, comfort, and cheer on her teammates. And finally, Taylor Huey's a senior cheerleader at Tucker High School. While balancing a very rigorous course load, Miss Huey also spends her free time as a volunteer tutor for at-risk elementary students, teaching them both reading and math. Don't forget, folks, you can nominate someone for the Positive Athlete Award. You can be a fan or a relative, an administrator. Really, any relationship is permissible. Just visit georgia.positiveathlete.org for further details. Again, that's georgia.positiveathlete.org for further details. Have you ever wondered what may be the most talented team ever honored in a single season by the TCA? Find out next in the Ever Wonder portion of the program. Throughout the 70-plus year history of the TCA, we've awarded many great players who've played on many great teams. But this week, we're going to focus on a team where the club honored not just one or two, but three young athletes from the same team in the same year. And this will be a recurring theme here on the All Sports Report as we revisit some of the great teams that were loaded with talent that were honored every year by the TCA, or in a particular year by the TCA. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you know you've got yourself quite a special team. And this week, we'll take a look closer at the 1991 Norcross Blue Devils. The Norcross program had been building momentum over the last few years, building into 1991, that is, and they were guided by their head coach, Theo Caldwell. That's a name that will elicit some real memories from a lot of you viewers out there. Caldwell, of course, and that Norcross Blue Devil team running a run and shoot offense, the famed run and shoot of the late 80s and early 90s. And so, Juan Daniels at wide receiver, Marseille Simpson at running back, and Ben Langford at linebacker were all honored during the fall of 1991. Juan Daniels was an explosive wide receiver, a lot of you will remember, at least at the high school classification. Of course, in college, he may have been as much of a possession receiver as anything else. His record-breaking season from 1991 is still second all-time in Gwinnett County history in receiving yards. Marseille Simpson was the ideal running back for this offense. He was tough and he was explosive, and he ran for 246 yards against an emerging Parkview program in 1991, which was a school record for rushing in a single ball game. And finally, on the defensive side of the ball, Ben Langford at that linebacking position was a hard-nosed player and one of the harder hitters in all of Gwinnett County in those days. He made plays all over the field, and in one region game in 1991, he registered 19 solo tackles. Juan Daniels and Marseille Simpson, as many of you know, went on to play for Ray Goff at the University of Georgia, while Ben Langford headed up north into Big Ten country and played for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, where he became team captain, by the way, in 1996. That 91 Norcross team finished the season at 11-2 before bowing out of the state playoffs, losing to McEachern in the state quarterfinals. Coming up next, we take a look at what's next, and of course, it's playoff time. For many people across Georgia high school athletics, this is the most exciting time of the year. This week, the beginning the first round of the state basketball tournament. To be precise, 2A through 6A begins their 32-team state tournament on Tuesday or Wednesday. Tuesday and Wednesday, the beginning of the 2A through 6A state basketball tournament, both boys and girls. The boys and girls of 1A public and private join the party on the 20th and 21st, remembering, of course, that public and private only have a 16-team state championship tournament. There are many of the usual suspects on the guys' side that will contend for state championships. Wheeler, Miller Grove, Jonesboro, Laney, Morgan County, Pace Academy, GAC, St. Francis. I just named a lot of defending state champions right there. And in each classification, you really have one or two teams that could upset those favorites. But expect Wheeler, expect Miller Grove, and Jonesboro and St. Francis to get back into the championship game and or potentially defend their state championships. On the girls' side, as much parity as we've seen in quite some time. The Osborne Lady Cardinals could win the 6A classification. Brunswick, Mays, and Sequoia, names we're not accustomed to talking about when it comes to championship pedigree, well, they could all win the 5A classification. Jonesboro, the Lady Cardinals, and Veterans, well, they could win the 4A classification, but to do so, of course, they'll have to buck the history of teams like St. Pius and Buford. In the 3A classification, how about Dawson County? Dawson County can win the 3A classification. Although they'll have to deal with two schools with championship pedigree as well, in Kendrick and Laney. In 2A, Holy Innocents looks to do what they've not been able to do in the last couple of years. Finally finish off the season with a state championship. Remembering, of course, in the 1A private classification, they've been undefeated the last couple of years before losing at Kennesaw State in the state semifinals. I know, I was there for both of those ball games. And they'll be the favorites to win the 2A classification. But speaking of 1A, where they were last year, expect to see St. Francis and Southwest Atlanta Christian again in the state semifinals on the 1A girls side, and Claxton, Taylor County, and Turner County to be contenders on the 1A girls public side. The state semifinals, will take place on February 27th and 28th this year, Friday and Saturday, as they usually are. Locations: Armstrong Atlantic, Kennesaw State, Columbus State, West Georgia, Fort Valley State, and of course Georgia Tech. That going from 1A public all the way down to the 6A classification. And remember, you can watch live streaming ball games. All of the state semifinal matchups can be seen live at nfhsnetwork.com. Yours truly, I'll be in Columbus for the 2A and 3A state semifinals. Coming up next, why the NCAA needs to do something and do something now in the My Take portion of the program. By now, you all know the saga of one Roquan Smith, one of the top linebackers in the country, much less in the Empire State of the South, a Macon County native who committed to UCLA on National Signing Day, then found out his position coach was most likely taking a new job with the Atlanta Falcons. Roquan spoke to that position coach, who said, "No, I declined that offer." Then heard from other sources that may have been members of the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff that were Georgia alum. We're still working on that story here in the media, that Ulbrich did in fact take the job with the Falcons. So Roquan then backs out of sending his letter of intent, as most likely you all know. He's now chosen the University of Georgia as his next academic institution. Now, as I mentioned, Smith is one of the top linebackers in the country. He's now being viewed as a trailblazer, because as much as the controversy of what happened on National Signing Day, what is now becoming the story of the situation is the fact that while he has committed to the University of Georgia, he will sign his financial aid agreement with the school, but will not sign a letter of intent. And the fact that Smith is chosen to do both of those facets of the process, or lack thereof, I suppose, what this does is protect him from being tied to the university if the Bulldogs have any unexpected coaching changes before he enrolls in summer semester classes in June. Now, on the surface, this sounds great. Sounds like a way of protecting the kids, because over the years we've heard more of these unsavory situations where coaches are, and you'll have to forgive my phrasing here, screwing over kids. But if this takes a hold with high school commits, and we start to see more of this, and it becomes a regular thing over the next few years, the NCAA must now seriously overhaul the recruiting and signing system. Look, I side with the universities and players at about a 50-50 clip in these situations that draw the ire of, of all of us, from fans to media members to other coaches to players. All of these myriad of situations that we're now seeing, I guess, over about the last decade or so. In this case, however, kids waiting until summer and then having the option before June 1, or really June 6, which is when a lot of these classes start, then changing their minds, it's going to create complete and utter chaos. Now, the obvious is the late nature of any decision. June, of course, is when summer semester begins. These kids are graduating in May, then they're enrolling for June semester. What are the schools going to do, though, that are on the quarter system? That's just a small can of worms that I just wanted to throw out there almost as a little joke to the situation. They'd have to have a different set of rules. Look, I could go on with a litany of situations that could be born from this new development. But the bottom line is, the good news for me is that I don't have to. The bottom line is, in my opinion, the NCAA does. It's their job. It's the university's jobs to now be proactive. You can see the writing on the wall. Something absolutely has to be done about this. You cannot have kids signing financial aid agreements, that money going to the university, the football teams preparing for these kids to be there, not speaking to other kids on the other side of the country, and then all of a sudden, in the background, after this kid's graduated in mid-May, before he enrolls in June at the University of Georgia and takes classes, he's secretly taking visits to other universities and decides on May 28th, no, I think I'm going to go to UCLA. It will cause complete and utter chaos. So the NCAA must act, and they must act now. Because this will catch on, by the way. I don't believe it'll become the norm, but I also don't believe it'll be terribly unusual. And regulating the newfound technique will be unlike any challenge the NCAA has ever faced. So as we are always accustomed to expecting from the NCAA, as we are always chastising the governing bodies of the National Collegiate Athletic Association for doing, do not wait to act. For once, please be proactive and stop these potential situations before they happen. Because in the end, it's not only going to be the universities that get burned. It's not only going to be the NCAA, but in the end, there's going to be some kid who decides to do this and makes some big mistake, and he ends up getting hammered in the process as well. Until next week, I'm Chris Mooneyham for the TCA All Sports Report.